Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the political and government correspondent. And today our guest is Senator Patty Schachtner.
Thank you for having me.
Senator, thank you for coming on the show. Last time we had you on, you were a candidate for Senate. So, and that was late 2017. The primary was in November, or no, December. It was actually the Monday before Christmas or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the special election was only 3 or 4 weeks after that in January, because I saw you next at the school board convention.
Yes.
So why don't we catch our listeners or our viewers up to date on what happened? Because you were a candidate, you faced a primary, one of 3 candidates, I believe, and your opponents on the Republican side, they had a primary. And so, and then there was a little bit of attention I saw on certain networks to the election. So let's just take those one at a time. First of all, how is life different today than it was 9 months ago? We're sitting here now at the end of June, almost 4th of July, 2018. And I think the announcement was sometime in October, wasn't it, that this special election would come up?
It was right around deer hunting time, because we had to have our signatures in. We had to have, so it was like the middle of November.
Okay, right, but I think, yeah, the
election.
As far as the announcement, I think the governor announced that he would, because for a while there was concern that he wasn't going to have an election at all.
Correct.
And then they announced that I think it was on Halloween Day, that there would be, and you had all of 2.5 weeks to put together your nomination papers.
Correct.
So that's what I was trying to do, is compare just before October, when you're not even thinking about this position, to now you're the senator for the 10th Senate District.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Reflecting back, it's one of those things where don't think long and hard about it, because you'll talk yourself out of it.
Right.
And I'm glad, after everything is all said and done, that I did take the opportunity to take this chance, because I really believe that I'm where I'm supposed to be right now at this time. I am learning a lot. I thought I knew a lot about government and policy and what was going on. What I found out is I know my niche that I know. And so I am learning things that I never thought I would learn before, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity to learn things that I never thought I would, even have in my wheelhouse to have a conversation about, but now I do.
Okay, so I like that aspect of being a student. Now, at the time that you heard the announcement that there would be a special election, and there was such a short period to make a decision and get nomination papers rolling, you were and still are the medical examiner for St. Croix County.
Yes. Yes.
And you were on the school board in Somerset.
Yes. And
your thought at that time, for politics-wise, was to run for school board, right? Your term was going to be up, and so you filed for that.
Yep, I filed for my papers for school board, and the election was after the papers needed to be filed.
Right, they needed to be in by like January 1st.
Right, and then the election was January 19th. So it's like, well, I really, enjoy doing the school board, so I'm going to keep with that, and we'll see what happens. Because
you truly didn't know.
Right.
And maybe the outcome was not what you expected?
Yeah, well, I thought that I would stay on the school board, but, I didn't. But
well, that's two elections outcomes as far as what you expected. You, I suppose, as of January 15th, you were more expecting to be reelected to the school board than you were to be elected to the Senate. Is that a fair statement?
That's a very fair statement.
Okay.
Yep,
considering that this was considered a pretty safe red district, the 10th Senate District, didn't necessarily turn out in those ways, so let's just break them down one at a time. Just summarize the national attention you got for the victory and the Senate race.
So, when the election happened, and that night, we got the call and we won. But in the back of my head, I knew that we had to leave for Milwaukee to go to the school board association conference, because I was doing a presentation the next day. So I was more thinking about that. And then on our way to Milwaukee from Baldwin all the way to Milwaukee, I was on the phone nonstop with reporters.
Wow.
And it was just,
CNN,
CNN,
MSNBC.
MSNBC, Huffington Post, Vogue. There was just so many, and it was really interesting. It just was not anything I was used to, and my husband and I in the car driving down the road, and I'm talking to these reporters. It just was not anything I was prepared for. I mean, I had nobody in the back to don't say that or to do say that. I mean, it was whatever I said is what came out.
I can't imagine that experience. But again, a little bit out of left field, if so to speak, or right field, in the sense that you did not run your Senate campaign as being what the national media were making this out to be, either pro-Trump or anti-Trump.
No.
Trump was not an issue in your Senate campaign at all.
No. When I decided to run, I really ran on the values that I believed in pertaining to the issues of mental health, access to care, Chapter 51,
the opioid crisis,
the opioids addiction, and suicide, and that it was a huge issue that was affecting the people I knew from my professional experience in St. Croix County, but with my colleagues in Pierce County and Polk County and Burnett County and Dunn County. These were conversations that medical examiners have all the time, and we saw the tragedies that were happening. So I was confident that I could have that conversation with anybody and be able to make points that we could do better.
I think if there are people out there, potential candidates, they should look at how you ran your race then in that regard, because you stuck to your message. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of temptation to go off on these other tangents and make it a President Trump referendum, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Or even in this case, a Governor Walker. Was there a lot about Governor Walker in the brief general election that there was?
To be quite honest, I don't think he ever came up.
Okay.
It just was, really, here's our problem. We can do better. When you chapter someone, and if they're at the Hudson Hospital and they're being chaptered, deem a danger to themselves or to family, and they haven't committed a crime, they are stabilized at the hospital, handcuffed, put in the back of a police car, and transferred to Mendota or Winnebago, and they haven't committed a crime. They're sick.
Right.
And is that the best we can do?
So what I'm impressed with is you circulated nomination papers, won a primary, and then ran a very brief general election just on who you were as a person and what your strengths were and your background. You didn't try to conform your campaign to what the party platform might be or what the party in Madison thought should be the top issues. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair, yeah. I mean, I really believe that the whole crisis of mental health, it affects law enforcement, affects the courts, affects Health and Human Services. It affects everything.
Right.
And, we can do better.
Well, let's talk a little bit. What do you think the top 3 reasons then for your victory? Otherwise, I might have segued a little bit into that. Number 1 being you stayed who you were and what your strengths were as far as what you knew and what you thought you could bring uniquely to Madison. But what were some of the other 2 or 3?
Well, I think the fact that my professional experience in emergency services and the medical examiner's office and being an instructor at WITC, that I had a lot of colleagues throughout St. Croix County and Pierce County and Polk County that knew me historically, whether it was through EMS or through education through the WITC or through organizations, Turning Point, where I sit on the board, Mental Health First Aid, Polk County Mental Health Mental Health Task Force is who partnered with us to create the St. Croix County Suicide Prevention Task Force. So I had a lot of networks out there, and there were a lot of people, and plus I had been an investigator, a death investigator, so I was in literally thousands of homes doing my work. So I had made unique relationships with a lot of different people in a very personal way that they could judge my values based on hands-on, face-to-face
So
experience.
qualifications, experience, relationships, I'm hearing.
Yep.
Not your stance on the income tax rate for the top 1%?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, what about the style of the election? Even though it was brief, our mailboxes were inundated with those oversized postcards. And I heard a lot of comments about how negative it was. Not so much on the Democrat side, but even in the primary on the Republican side, it seemed to be a little bit negative, and no one wants to be the first to go negative, so to speak, but it happened nonetheless. What do you think the role of the style of the campaign had in your election?
So from the very beginning, what I told the people that were helping me with my election is no matter what, I had to maintain my integrity. Win or lose, I serve the public in a very, very personal way with the medical examiner's office. And I'm not going to jeopardize the relationships that I have for politics. So I'm not going there. So when it started happening, it would have been real easy to say, okay, go there. But in the back of my mind, I just kind of always, related it to, this is politics. And in my work, real life, what they deal with is far worse than, some bad words about me. And that's what really, I'm not saying that it didn't hurt, it did, but it just was easy it was easy to really make the decision to not fight back in that way.
Okay. Now we've heard that your opponent, obviously in the general, was Representative Adam Jarko, who represented the Assembly District to the north of St. Croix County, and he's not running for a re-election for the Assembly. Do you have any take on why that might be?
Well, during the campaign, he had bought his dad's business. So he has this, that fire extinguisher business. And he's a practicing lawyer. And he has that campground. And he's got twins. I think his plate is pretty full, and I'm 58. I remember what it was like being a young parent and having all that stuff going on. So I certainly don't think there's anything more to it than the fact that, whether you win or lose, life goes on and you have to make choices. And I don't see anything wrong with, seeing he served 2 terms. He did a good job, with the people that he served, and now he's focusing on his family. That's what I think is going on. I could be wrong, but that's how I look at it.
So the Assembly is a 2-year term, whereas the Senate is a 4-year term. So when would you have to seek re-election?
So I don't seek re-election till 2020. So for me, right now is just really all about learning. I'm learning a lot about the district that I didn't know, spending a lot of time in district. We only had two session days while I was down in Madison, and they were intense. But I really enjoy being up here and listening to folks and trying to help them navigate through things. I never realized how many people actually call the Senate office for help. I had called one of my staff members to just kind of get some data, and we've had over 2,700 constituent calls since I was in office.
That's in 5 months.
Yeah, and in that time, I've had 160 different meetings with community members and community events. So I'm really priding myself going out there and being in District 10 and meeting the people.
So you're totally fine with that ratio of having 160 meetings with constituents and in district, and only 2 days down in Madison.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. After those 2 days of session, there's nothing else to do.
Right.
So you can stay down there and be in your office, but my staff helps. I have staff that is down there that keeps a very tough schedule for me and keeps me focused. And I am in Madison now like every other week. I go down for 2 days, and we schedule meetings both days full through. I'm going to be going down. I'm part of the dyslexia study group, so I'll be going down for that.
So
But
just because they're not in session doesn't mean you don't go to Madison.
that's correct. Yep.
And okay, so we're in the second year of the budget biennium. You missed all that, right? The fight over the budget and the fact that it took until, what, October, November
October,
before it was final. Now, so you will not face election here this November, but you will come January, February, the initiation of the next biennium budget will kick off. Okay. And so, not thinking too far ahead, but maybe it is, but have you thought about who your likely opponents would be for 2020?
I honestly haven't even thought about it. To me, 2.5 years is a long time, and 18 months is a long time. A lot of things in the whole climate and the whole thing of politics changes every day. To
Sure.
think what it's going to be like 18 months from now when it's time to turn in papers, they have no idea, and I don't even care to speculate who would be out there in that.
Fair enough. So, but as far as the election goes, do you think your lack of state elective office experience was a help or a hindrance ultimately?
I think it was a help in the fact that nobody who runs and wins for the first time has experience. You know, I had experience on a school board, I had experience on a town board.
Except when it comes to state senate, because there is only 33 state senators, it's very common for the candidates to be state representatives. Like in the case on the Republican side, Representative Jarko, Representative Zimmerman were both candidates, but you weren't. Also, your two Democratic opponents also didn't have elective state office experience.
And I think that people are looking for something different, but the fact that I didn't have actual experience in Madison didn't mean that I don't have experience in legislative outcomes.
Right.
You know, I could see firsthand what happened in education. I could see firsthand what happens when someone's chaptered. I can see firsthand when people don't have access to adequate.
And by chaptered, let's just, what do you mean by that?
With the mental health crisis.
Okay.
So, you know, when someone is,
When law enforcement has to step in and take custody of someone.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. So I saw a lot of that firsthand. I seen, law enforcement, the frustrations. I mean, you put in 10 or 12, you put your day in, and then you chapter 51 someone, and now you have to drive another 5 hours across the state, and it takes another 5 hours to get back.
Right. It's a lot of overtime that we're paying.
And not to mention what it's doing to that person's, home life and their own mental health, and that. So I would see firsthand, because I worked with, people that were dealing with the ramifications of decisions, and I might not have legislative experience, but I have real life experience.
Well, and that's, I'm assuming you found in running in the 3 assembly districts that make up the 10th Senate district that, is there some perception of folks down in Madison, kind of like the Beltway bubble that Washington is? Is that kind of perceived that Madison might be Wisconsin's version of that on the national level?
I do think there is somewhat of that. As even now, I mean, people just are shocked that I'm in the district. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but I'm representing you, so I have to come where you're at to see what your problem is, or so that I can understand it, so that I can bring it to Madison to talk about legislation and why this really will impact District 10.
And so was today just a typical day for Patty Schachtner, Senator?
Yeah.
You started the day out in Hudson at Daybreak Rotary Club, where I happen to be a member, talking about mental health and happiness, right?
Yep. 7 o'clock
mental
this morning.
well-being.
Yep.
And from Hudson, what were the other communities you've already been in today?
So from Hudson, I drove up to Webster and had toured the New Pathways. It's a youth treatment center. And then first I was in their art gallery, then I was at their treatment center, and then we went to Siren, and then I went to Frederick and the girls' treatment center in Frederick. and then visited the facility there. And it just was, this organization can serve 46 kids. These are kids from 12 to 14, experiencing all these traumas and all this stuff, and addiction and abuse and just everything we hear about, and meeting with these kids that were just so thankful that they got to come to northern Wisconsin for treatment. And the average stay is 6 months, but some of them are there for, I spoke to a girl today that was there for a year. They've had someone that's there for 2 years. But the part that people don't understand is when you give treatment to kids, number one, they're kids.
Right.
And then you take that child that you've had all this intense therapy with, and there's nothing to help them be successful when they go back home.
Okay.
So we invest, it's $350 a day to be there. Then, depending on what insurance covers and all that there stuff is what actually comes out. But then we don't invest on the backside to help them stay successful. And I'm just like, we don't do no aftercare. And there's no funding for that. Now there's trying to get some funding for federal funding for 6 months aftercare. But, can you imagine coming from inner city Milwaukee or Madison or Green Bay and going up to Webster on the Yellow River and snowshoeing, and they do like underwater photography for therapy.
Okay.
And they do all these creative things and artistic things, and they, have education. And it was just amazing what they did to have this treatment center that, totally treats about 75 kids a day. And, their waiting list is for 6 months for boys and then 12 months for girls.
So you get around in the district. You don't just stay in St. Croix County where you're the medical examiner.
No.
You were out to Burnett and Polk County today.
Yep.
So what's your biggest surprise since taking office? I mean, what aspect of the job did you maybe expect the least that you see as being either an important or a more frequent aspect than you expected?
The thing I was the most surprised about was that when I go to communities, how shocked people are that I'm there.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've heard we've never had a legislator come here before.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, that's why I'm here. Get that.
Right.
Show me what you got.
Okay.
And whether it's a private business or a school or a nonprofit. And then I like to stop in. My husband and I take our motorcycle and we'll just travel through the district and go to different businesses and just don't even say who we are, just to get the experience of what their business is about.
Okay.
And just,
I mean, you don't have prearranged front people that...
I have some, but
Okay.
then, I'm still that person that has to live my life. And
Right. So not every place you go is an appointment in a book then, necessarily?
yeah, my 160 were in the book. The rest of them are on my time.
Okay, very
to do
good.
it.
Now, if you were, I know you're not running this fall, but if you were, what do you see as maybe the top 3 issues that might link in common with the different people? Obviously, everyone has their different backgrounds, like you had your background, but what would you see as being 3 pretty important issues for Wisconsin legislators, whether they're incumbents or challengers?
Well, transportation is huge. It's huge. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We know that. Figuring out how to navigate through that conversation is...
Was that what? It's huge because of priorities, or is it on funding?
I think a little bit of both.
The fundamental difference between borrowing for that infrastructure or paying as you go.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. There's lots of investing going on in the higher populated areas, which they need, but that doesn't mean that we don't need investments in our infrastructure around here. As I'm traveling through, I can tell you where some of the best potholes are. And being someone who was on a town board, when you look at your budget for your town board and you have 2 late snowstorms like we did, that can totally just bust your road budget.
Right.
And we're seeing that's happening, and you have levy limits and all that there. You have a very small amount of money for roads, and it's $100,000, I believe it is, per mile.
Okay.
So, you have to be really thoughtful. And where I come from, Star Prairie Township, we kind of planned on 1 mile a year, and we have 65 miles. So that pretty much says in your lifetime, maybe one road will your road may get fixed once in your lifetime. Well, you just can't sustain.
No, because roads don't last 65 years.
No. So
Okay, well, how about besides transportation?
education.
Okay.
It's really interesting looking at how the partnerships between WITC and school districts are really looking at and addressing 21st century education. But you also have to have investments. You need those investments from the business community. If you're looking to have kids trained in the technical things, technical occupations, then the business community also has to step up. Mark Taylor out of OEM is just like a champion when it comes to that, and how he believes in
Mark Tyler,
yep. And I mean what he believes in, and you look at what he's doing. He is pretty amazing.
Right.
And
he's been a real leader for vocational education and on-the-job training. So there's a lot of great programs. So transportation, education,
healthcare.
And healthcare.
Yeah,
okay.
The three biggies.
And that is really kind of the struggle is being able to address all three. You might be able to give one real good focus, maybe two, but it's kind of hard for all three. But these are real life, impact people's families and lives. So now moving to, again, focusing on this fall's election, why do you believe that Governor Walker is seeking a third term?
Well, I kind of believe that's all he knows how to do. I think he is the epitome of a career politician.
Okay.
And, I just...
Is it maybe to keep alive his aspirations for national office if we see depending on what happens with President Trump's re-election?
Either that or Fox News.
Okay.
I just don't know. I would just kind of think that having a pulse on what's going on, that, for someone who came in with Act 10 and kind of really...
Well, he shook up the apple cart for sure with Act 10.
And now to turn around and say he's pro-education is just like, what? So,
well, do you expect any more major reforms out of him like Act 10 was 8 years ago? Or do you just more of the same, maybe some more business tax cuts, more restrictions on healthcare access? What do you see as far as maybe the issues there in that race might be?
I think tax cuts and that are going to be a huge part of that. But, sooner or later we're going to have to address our roads. We're going to have to address infrastructure. We're going to have to address broadband. We're going to have to address these things. So we can just, have those easy conversations that pit side against side. Or,
what can we do together to move
I
forward
would
together?
I personally, I think that just working on solutions instead of sides is how the people of Wisconsin will be better
except
served.
One of the solutions that was, has been promoted when it comes to education. Okay, so now teacher unions are out of the picture. The next is moving toward the public subsidizing private education as the answer for improving education. What's your position on that?
Well, I think if it was a fair, balanced table, public education are required to take all students. Private is not. Mm-hmm. So that's like, literally picking the cream of the crop on who you get in your classroom, and then telling the private education or the public education people, you get everybody else, and now you just deal with it. Right. And there's no data out there that says that that's better. So by villainizing our public education system, especially here in District 10, a lot of our good teachers now are on the other side of the river. We are 34th in reading. We have a lot of issues that we have to look at as a state on how we're going to make it better. And parents have actual demands on what they want out of education because of this. So we now created this system that you can open enroll. I mean, so we don't have a lot of options when it comes to private school around here, but we can open enroll to any school we want, and parents are fluid.
Right.
So parents are taking their, they're literally interviewing schools on where they want their kids to go. And it's about what are the best opportunities for my kids? What are the best experiences that they're going to have? And that includes, the arts. It includes, do you have wraparound care in your system? Do you have social workers? Do you have all that stuff? So, what he's done is created a system that we now have communities fighting against communities for students. And you don't create that synergy of really education as it used to be. Will it ever go back? Probably not. But we got to figure out how we can serve our communities, because again, even with that, people that are fluid can open enroll.
Mm-hmm. But isn't it just promoting competition? Doesn't competition make us better?
I think that every one of our systems are good for the community that they serve. By doing what we're doing, we're also changing what a community is. Mm-hmm. Your school district is the heart of the community. If I'm taking my kids from this community, I'm not going to be engaged because I'm taking them to this community to go to school, but then I don't live there, so I'm not going to be engaged. So that whole thing about creating community is one of the unintentional consequences of open enrollment.
I guess. And you're raising, because people who are taking their kids to another district have certain expectations, but yet they don't have the skin in the game, so to speak, as paying those taxes to get that benefit.
Well, and then for that local one, if you've got several families, they're going to vote no on any referendum because they're going over here.
Right.
Right. So.
Well, now switching gears a little bit from education then to the Foxconn deal, which has gotten a lot of play. In other parts of the state, we don't hear as much. Up here, we get more Minnesota news. But just what are your expectations in that regard, and how long do you think it will be before we know whether it was a success?
Well, the estimates, that was decided before my time. And it was kind of split within our district. I believe Shannon voted for it and Adam voted against it for different reasons.
Right.
And,
but it was like $3.2 billion, something like that?
Now it's 4.5.
Now it's 4.5,
yeah.
Okay.
So, and it's estimated to be 25 years to, in the best case scenario, to break even. So it's a big long-term investment. And the company itself doesn't have a good history of following up on its promises. So the whole thing really comes down to, this here deal has been made and now it's holding accountable. But the investment that the state's gonna have to make in infrastructure and everything is so huge that once that investment is made to start that, I mean, you're talking, that's jobs. There's a lot of lives that are being affected by this. And it's a huge gamble, $4.5 billion in school funding or roads, or it would be something that everybody in Wisconsin could share in. This here, very few people in District 10 are going to reap any rewards of the Foxconn deal. So we can only hope that we see benefits.
25-year payback just to break even.
Yeah, that's what it's.
And that's under a best case scenario.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm just thinking about the investment in education that Governor Walker pushed and the Assembly reluctantly went along with. That was, $600 million over a biennium, so about $300 million a year. You'd have to keep that up and increase the budget for 15 years in a row just to get to that same level of investment.
Yep. And the frustrating part is even with education, we're still not at 2010 funding.
Right.
So we're still behind the game.
If it had stayed it tied to inflation.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's so.
All right. Final topic, because we had started with talking about your experiences and how it might have impacted. And you were on 2 ballots at one time and didn't make it onto the school board in Somerset. What are your thoughts about that now and how that all played out?
Well, when I got elected to the Senate, there were a lot of people that didn't think I could do both. And quite honestly, when I got my papers in and everything. I honestly thought I would be on the school board and not in the Senate seat.
Right.
So that kind of got flipped. Looking back now and reflecting on it, it's probably for the best.
Things happen for a reason.
Yeah, and it has helped me being someone from Somerset, and proud to be from Somerset, to go throughout District 10 and actually see all the different systems that are out there. I think everybody in District 10 can learn something from everybody in District 10.
Okay.
There's some really pretty phenomenal programs going on, in Webster, in Siren, Grantsburg. Grantsburg and Webster are both listed as best schools.
Right.
That's who would have even thought about that?
Right.
That's pretty dang good. They should be proud of themselves. And Siren, 100% graduation rate. That's good stuff,
Yes.
So we've got a lot of good things, and by being on the school board now, and by not being on the school board now, I can be much more subjective and objective when I look at education, from the perspective of policy and personality.
Okay.
And sometimes they get in the way of each other.
Sure.
So I'm very appreciative that I can now, go into school districts with an open mind and really able to listen to what they need to best serve their students.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show, even if it is just 2 days that you've been actually officially in session, but amazing the number of calls. You said 2,700 calls in 5 months. That's over 500 a month.
Yeah.
Wow. So good luck with all that
Thank you.
constituent service. And hopefully we can get you on the show again, maybe after the elections or early in the next session,
for sure.
to kind of set up, see how maybe some of these big issues, like you mentioned, education, transportation, healthcare, how they are playing out at the state level. Will you do that?
I sure will.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Well, Patty, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson. Keep watching.